My parents raised my brother like a prince, and me like his servant. For 23 years, I cleaned his room, cooked his meals, and stood in the background while he blew out candles I helped pay for. They always said it like it was fact, like it was law, like it was something written into my DNA. Some children are born to serve. And for a long time, I believed them. I believed that my place in this family was somewhere behind a door, somewhere between a sink full of dishes and a laundry basket that was never empty. I believed that love was something you earned by being quiet, by being useful, by not asking questions. But on my brother's wedding day, everything cracked. The ballroom was full, over 180 guests, crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, champagne glasses clinking like everything in the world made sense, like everything was exactly where it should be. And I was standing there, not as a daughter, not as family, but in a black dress my mother picked out because it looked appropriate for staff. I was carrying a tray of drinks at my own brother's wedding. And then it happened. My brother's fiancé's father, a man I had never met before that night, turned toward me as the photographer gathered everyone for a family picture. He looked at my brother. He looked at my parents. And then he looked at me. And he didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't look away. He just stared. Like he was trying to solve something. Like something didn't add up. The room kept moving, people laughing, glasses clinking, music playing, but in that moment, everything slowed down. Because the way he looked at me, it wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. And then he said something so quietly, I almost thought I imagined it. That's not possible. And before anyone could ask what he meant, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and walked out of the room. That was the phone call that destroyed my entire family. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? My name is Lila Monroe. I'm 23 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I understood exactly who I was. I thought I was the daughter who didn't quite measure up, the one who needed to try harder, be quieter, be better. My brother, Ethan Monroe, he was everything. At 16, he got a brand new BMW, $42,000 with a red bow on top. I got his old vacuum cleaner and a list of chores. He had a 400 square foot bedroom with a private bathroom, hardwood floors, and a walk-in closet. I slept in what used to be a storage room next to the laundry machines. No window, just a thin mattress and a buzzing fluorescent light that flickered every time someone ran the dryer. When he turned 18, my parents threw him a party with 120 guests, a live band, catered food that cost more than my entire year of school supplies. When I turned 18, my mother handed me a grocery list and told me to make myself useful. And every time I hesitated, every time I asked why, every time I tried to understand where I stood in this family, they would say it again. Calm, certain, like they were doing me a favor by reminding me. Some children are born to serve. And eventually, I stopped asking. I learned how to move quietly through a room, how to listen more than I spoke, how to notice things, small things, the way people look at each other when they think no one's watching, the way silence changes depending on who's in the room. I noticed something else too. Something I never had the courage to say out loud. I didn't look like them. Not really. My brother had my father's jawline, the same dark hair, the same sharp eyes. My mother and him shared this easy, natural resemblance, like they belonged in the same photograph without trying. But me, I was always just slightly off. Different eyes, different features. Subtle enough that no one questioned it, but obvious enough that people sometimes paused. Sometimes they'd say, "You must take after a distant relative." And my parents would laugh it off too quickly, too casually, like they had rehearsed that answer. I didn't think much of it back then, because when you grow up being told who you are, you don't question it. You accept it. You shrink into it. You build your entire identity around it. Until one day, someone who doesn't know the rules walks into the room and sees everything differently. That night at the wedding, when Mr. Carter looked at me like I wasn't supposed to exist in that space, like I was a mistake in a picture that had been carefully arranged for years, something inside me shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to make me feel something I hadn't felt before. Doubt. And doubt is dangerous. Because once it's there, it doesn't go away. It grows. It spreads. It starts asking questions you were never supposed to ask. And 3 days later, when the results came back, when the truth was printed in black ink on a single sheet of paper, that quiet doubt turned into something else entirely. Something irreversible. Something that would force me to look at my entire life and realize none of it was what I thought it was. For most of my life, nothing about the way they treated me felt unusual, not at first. Because when something happens every single day for years, it stops feeling like abuse, it starts feeling like structure, like rules, like gravity. You do not question gravity. You adjust to it. I learned that early. When I was 8 years old, I woke up one Saturday morning to the smell of pancakes. Real pancakes, the kind you see in commercials, golden brown with butter melting on top. I remember walking into the kitchen thinking maybe, just maybe, this was one of those mornings where things would be different. My brother was sitting at the table, still in his pajamas, watching cartoons on his tablet. My mother placed a plate in front of him. 4 pancakes, syrup, strawberries, whipped cream. I stood there waiting. She did not look at me. She just handed me a sponge and pointed toward the sink. Dishes first. I nodded. Of course. Dishes first. By the time I finished, the pancakes were gone. My brother had already moved on to something else, laughing at a video, syrup still on his fingers. My mother glanced at me and said, "There are leftovers if you are still hungry." There were not. There never were. And that became the pattern. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone, there was always a version of that moment. When Ethan turned 10, he had a birthday party at a rented indoor trampoline park. 50 guests. Pizza, cake, gift. Bags that probably cost $20 each. I spent the entire day running between tables, refilling drinks, cleaning up after kids who did not even know my name. When someone asked my mother who I was, she smiled politely and said, "Oh, she helps out." I was 10 years old. When I turned 10, there was no party. No cake. Just a quiet happy birthday while I folded laundry in the hallway. My father handed me a $20 bill and said, "Be responsible with it." I used it to buy groceries later that week because we were out of milk. That was my gift. Responsibility. It did not stop when we got older. It got more precise, more measured. When Ethan turned 16, he got that BMW. I remember the exact model because my father repeated it 3 times to the neighbors. A 3 Series, brand new, custom interior, leather seats that still smelled like money. I was standing on the driveway holding the camera, taking pictures of him smiling next to it. My father said, "Get a good angle." I did. That same week, my mother handed me a list of new responsibilities. Laundry schedule, meal prep, cleaning rotations. She said it casually, like she was updating a calendar. "Now that your brother has more going on, we need you to step up." Step up. I was 15 years old, and I was already doing everything. Cooking dinner 5 nights a week. Cleaning the entire house every Sunday. Ironing my father's shirts. Organizing my mother's closet by color and season. I knew their routines better than they did. I knew exactly how my father liked his coffee, down to the temperature. 140 degrees. Not hotter, not colder. I knew my mother's schedule, her appointments, her preferences. I knew everything. Because when your value is tied to how useful you are, you become very good at being useful. But here's the part that stayed with me. The part one could never quite explain. The moments in between. The small pauses. The looks. The way people outside the family reacted. Teachers would call my parents in for meetings and say things like, "Lila is very capable, very observant." And my parents would nod politely, then say, "She just needs direction." Always that word. Direction. Like I was something unfinished. Something incomplete. Once when I was 14, a substitute teacher stopped me after class. She looked at me for a long second, then said, "You have a very strong presence. Do not let anyone make you feel small." I remember smiling and saying thank you, but inside, I did not understand what she meant, because I did feel small. Every single day. And I thought that was normal. That same year, a neighbor came over for dinner. A woman I had never met before. She watched me set the table, serve the food, clear the plates. At one point, she turned to my mother and asked, "Which one is yours?" My mother laughed.
Light.
Dismissive. Both of them. The woman looked back at me, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Really?" Just that. One word. Really. My mother changed the subject immediately. Too quickly. And I felt it again. That pause. That small crack in something I could not name. But I pushed it down. Because questioning things did not lead anywhere good. Questioning things led to silence. Or worse, disappointment. And disappointment in our house was not loud. It was not yelling. It was quieter than that. It was withdrawal. Coldness. Distance. Like you had stepped out of line and needed to find your way back without anyone telling you how. So I learned not to question. I learned to stay in my place. I learned to accept the rules as they were given to me. Because every time I hesitated, every time I slowed down, every time I almost asked why, and my mother would say it again.
Calm. Certain.
Like she was reminding me of something I should already know. Some children are born to serve. And every time she said it, something inside me would go quiet. Not broken. Not shattered. Just quiet. Like a room where the lights had been turned off one by one. Until there was nothing left to see. And for 23 years, I lived in that darkness, thinking it was the only world there was. By the time I turned 17, something inside me had changed, not in a loud way, not in a way anyone else could point to and say, "There, that is where it happened," but in a quiet, steady way that made everything feel sharper, clearer. I still woke up early. I still made breakfast. I still cleaned the house, folded the laundry, ironed the shirts, memorized every preference, every routine, every unspoken expectation. On the outside, nothing changed. But inside, I started watching differently. I started noticing patterns. Not just what they said, but when they said it. Not just how they treated me, but how they reacted when other people were around. Because there was a difference. A subtle one, but it was there. When it was just us. I was invisible. Functional. Expected. But when guests came over, something shifted. My mother would soften her tone slightly. My father would acknowledge me with a brief nod, like I was part of the background, but at least worth recognizing. And Ethan would become generous. Charming. He would say things like, "Lila makes the best coffee," or "She is really good at organizing things." And people would smile. They would look at me like I was something almost impressive. And for a second, just a second, I would feel it. That flicker of something I had never been allowed to fully experience. Recognition. But it never lasted. It always faded the moment the door closed. The moment the guests left. The moment the performance was over. And that is when I realized something important. Their behavior was not random. It was controlled. Calculated. Managed. They knew exactly what they were doing. And that realization, it did something to me. Because if it was intentional, then it was not just the way things were.
It was a choice.
They were choosing this. Every single day. I remember one specific moment. It was a Tuesday evening. Nothing special. Just dinner. Ethan had just gotten accepted into a business program, something my father had been talking about for months, like it was already guaranteed. That night, they celebrated.
Steak. Wine.
Dessert from a bakery across town. I cooked everything. I plated everything. I served everything. And when we sat down, my father raised his glass and said, "To my son, the future of this family." Everyone clinked glasses. Everyone smiled. And then his eyes moved to me, just for a second. And he added, almost as an afterthought, "And to Lila for supporting him."
Supporting him.
That was my role. That was my identity. Not a daughter. Not an individual. A support system. I remember nodding, smiling, saying thank you, because that is what I was trained to do. But inside something did not sit right. Because I had done more than support him. I had built the structure around him. I had made sure everything in his life ran smoothly enough for him to succeed. And yet, I was not part of that success. I was just the reason it looked easy. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, cleaning the same counter twice, wiping a surface that was already clean, not because it needed to be done, but because I was thinking. And for the first time, I let myself think a question all the way through. What if this is not who I am, but who they decided I should be? The thought felt dangerous, like stepping somewhere I was not allowed to go. But once it was there, it did not leave. It followed me into every room, into every interaction, into every quiet moment where I used to just exist without questioning. I started testing things, small things, safe things. I would take an extra minute before responding to my mother. I would ask a question instead of immediately saying yes. I would stand a little straighter when I walked into a room, and every time, I watched their reactions. My mother would pause, just slightly, like she was recalibrating. My father would look at me a second longer than usual, not angry, not confused, just aware. And Ethan, he would laugh.
Light.
Dismissive, like nothing I did could possibly matter. And that told me everything. Because if it truly did not matter, they would not react at all. But they did, which meant on some level they saw it. They noticed the shift. And they did not like it. Around that time, I also started noticing something else. My reflection. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a moment of realization in front of a mirror.
Just in passing.
In store windows. In reflections on glass doors. In photos I was not meant to be in. I would catch glimpses of myself and compare. Compare to Ethan.
Compare to my parents.
Compare to the photos hanging on the walls. And the more I looked, the harder it became to ignore. The differences were not just small. They were structural. My features did not match theirs in the way family features usually do. There was no shared blueprint. No visual echo. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I started remembering all the small comments over the years. The neighbor who asked, "Which one is yours?" The teacher who paused before speaking. The way my parents would redirect conversations that got too close to that topic. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. And I had missed it because I was too busy trying to earn a place that might have never been mine to begin with. But even then, even with all of that building inside me, I did not confront them. I did not ask questions. Because deep down there was still a part of me that was afraid. Afraid of what the answer might be. Afraid that if I pulled on that thread, everything would unravel. And I was not ready for that. Not yet. So I stayed quiet. I observed. I adapted. I waited. Because something told me I would not have to look for the truth forever. Sooner or later it would find me. The first time I spoke to him, it was not dramatic. It was not one of those moments where everything shifts all at once. It was quiet. Almost forgettable if you were not paying attention. But I was. Because by then, I had trained myself to notice the things other people ignored. It happened 3 weeks before the wedding. Ethan had invited his fiancé's family over for dinner. Not at a restaurant. Not somewhere neutral. At our house. Which meant everything had to be perfect. And perfect in our house did not mean relaxed or welcoming. It meant controlled.
Timed.
Measured. My mother handed me a list at 7:12 that morning. I remember the exact time, because I had already been awake for 2 hours. The list had 14 items. Clean the entire first floor. Prepare appetizers. Set the table for 8. Polish the silverware. Iron the tablecloth. Chop vegetables. Marinate the chicken. Prepare dessert from scratch. And at the bottom underlined, stay out of the way. That was always the last instruction. Do everything and then disappear. By 5:45 in the evening, the house looked like something out of a magazine. Everything aligned. Everything spotless. Everything exactly where it should be. I changed into a simple black dress. When the doorbell rang at 6 o'clock, I was already standing in the kitchen, hands dry, posture straight, ready to move. I heard voices, laughter, the low hum of introductions. My father's tone shifted immediately, warmer, more polished. My mother's voice softened in that practiced way she only used around people she wanted to impress. And then I heard a new voice.
Calm. Steady.
Measured. Not loud. not trying to take control of the room, but somehow doing it anyway. That was Daniel Carter. I did not know his name yet, but I remember the way the room adjusted around him. Some people command attention by being louder, others by being still. He was the second kind. I stepped out of the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks, 8 glasses, balanced evenly. I had done this thousands of times. But when I walked into the room, something felt different. Not wrong, just different. I placed the drinks one by one. My father, my mother, Ethan, his fiancée, Olivia, and then him. When I handed him his glass, our eyes met for the first time. And he did not look at me the way people usually did. Not quickly, not politely, not like I was part of the background. He looked at me fully, like I was something that required attention. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, but it felt longer, long enough for me to feel it. That shift, that pause, the same kind of pause I had noticed my whole life but never understood. Until now. Thank you, he said. His voice was even, controlled, but there was something under it, something I could not name yet. I nodded and moved on. Of course I did. That was my role. But I felt his eyes on me again as I walked away. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, in a way that made me aware. Dinner moved smoothly. It always did when I was in charge of everything. No one noticed. I brought out each course at the right time, cleared plates before anyone had to ask, refilled glasses before they were empty. The conversation flowed around me. Business, education, future plans. My brother spoke about his ambitions. My father nodded with pride. My mother smiled at the right moments. And Daniel Carter listened. He did not interrupt. He did not dominate. He observed, just like I did. And that was the first thing that made me pay attention to him. Because people like that, they notice more than they say. At one point, Olivia mentioned something about childhood photos. Something light, casual. My mother immediately stood up and said, "Oh, we have plenty of those." She walked over to the living room shelf and pulled out a photo album. I felt it before I saw it. That shift in the air. Subtle, but sharp. Because I knew what was inside that album. Or more accurately, what was not. She opened it on the coffee table. Everyone leaned in. Pages turned. Pictures of Ethan as a baby. Ethan at 5. Ethan at 10. Birthday parties. School events. Vacations. There were photos of my parents. Photos of extended family. Smiles. Laughter. Moments captured and preserved. And then there were a few photos of me. Not many. Scattered. Out of sequence. Always slightly off to the side. Like I had been added in later. Like I was not originally part of the picture. I watched Daniel Carter as he looked through the album. His expression did not change, but his eyes slowed down on certain pages. He lingered longer than the others. And then he looked up. Not at my parents. Not at Ethan. At me. Again. That same look. Focused. Calculating. And then, just before he turned to leave, he said something so quietly, I almost missed it. That lines up. He walked away after that.
No explanation.
No follow-up. Just those 2 words. And I stood there in the kitchen, holding a plate I had already cleaned, feeling something shift again. Not doubt this time. Something stronger. Because for the first time, someone else had seen it too. After that night, something shifted in a way I could not ignore anymore. It was not loud. No one said anything directly.
No confrontation.
No questions asked. But the silence changed. And silence, when you have lived inside it your whole life, you learn to hear the difference. Album. The way his expression did not match his words. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became.
He was not confused.
He was confirming something. And that realization, it did something dangerous. It gave me permission to question everything. 3 days later, the house was quieter than usual. Not empty, just contained. My mother was in the living room, organizing something that did not need organizing. My father was in his office, door slightly open, voice low on a phone call he ended the moment I walked past. Ethan was out.
Wedding meetings.
Of course. I was in the kitchen, finishing up lunch prep, when I heard the doorbell. One sharp ring. Then silence. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the front door. When I opened it, there was no one there. Just a small package on the ground.
Plain.
The flap and pulled the contents out.
Papers.
Several pages.
Dense.
Structured. Clinical. At the top, bold letters. DNA analysis report. For a second, everything went quiet. Not the room. Not the house.
Me.
Like every sound inside me had been turned off at once. I did not read it immediately. I could not. Because in that moment, I understood something before I saw a single word. Whatever was on those pages, it was not going to confirm my life. It was going to explain it. And those are two very different things. I heard footsteps behind me. My mother. What is it? She asked, wetting to the envelope in my hands. Enough to understand that this was not an accident. This was not random. This had been set in motion deliberately.
Carefully.
With intention. I kept reading. And then, I saw the line that changed everything.
Biological relation probability.
99.98%. I blinked once.
Slow.
Controlled. Reading it again. Not because I did not understand it, but because I needed to feel the weight of it. To let it settle. To let it replace everything I had been told for 23 years. I was not their daughter. Not partially. Not emotionally. Not biologically. Not in any way that could be measured or proven. I never had been. And somehow that was not the most shocking part. The most shocking part was this. That meant everything they said, every rule, every expectation, every role they assigned to me had never been about who I was.
It had been about what I was to them.
Something they could use. Something they could shape. Something that did not belong. Lila. My mother's voice again.
Closer now.
Sharper. I turned slowly this time. Not rushed. Not defensive. Just steady. She was standing a few feet behind me. Her eyes fixed on the papers in my hand. Not on my face. Not on my expression. On the papers.
My father was in the doorway now.
I had not heard him come in. But there he was. Still. Silent. Watching. The room felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way tension compresses space. I held the top page up slightly. Not fully presenting it. Not hiding it either. Just enough. Enough for them to see the title. DNA analysis report. My mother's expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Recognition. And fear.
Small.
Controlled. But undeniable. My father's jaw tightened. Just slightly. But I saw it. Because I had spent years studying the smallest changes in their behavior. Where did you get that? He asked. His voice was even. But there was pressure behind it. Like he was holding something back. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as my father. Not as the authority in the room. Just as a man. And for the first time, I did not feel smaller than him. I did not feel like I needed to answer immediately. I did not feel like I needed to justify anything. It was delivered. I said. Simple.
Direct.
True. My mother took a step forward. Give it to me. Not a request. A command. The same tone she had used my entire life. The tone that usually made me move without thinking. But this time, I did not move. I did not hand it over. I did not look away. I just stood there, holding it. And in that moment, something fundamental changed. Because for the first time, I realized something they had never expected me to realize. They had power over me because I believed they did. Because I accepted the role they gave me. Because I never questioned it. But that power, it was never absolute. It was conditional. And the condition had just been removed. Lila, my father said again, his voice lower now. We need to talk about this.
Need. Not want.
Not should.
Need.
I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because of what it revealed. They were not in control of this anymore. I looked back down at the paper.
Just for a second.
And then back at them.
You already knew? I said.
Not a question. A statement. Silence.
Thick.
Heavy. Immediate. My mother's lips parted slightly. No words came out. My father did not respond. But he did not deny it either. And that was all I needed. Because confirmation does not always come in words. Sometimes it comes in what people cannot say. I lowered the paper slowly, set it on the counter between us, not offering it, not hiding it, just placing it there. Like evidence, like truth, like something that no longer belonged to them. And for the first time in my life, I was not waiting for them to tell me who I was. I already knew, and whatever came next was not going to be decided by them anymore. No one spoke for a long time, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. The kind of silence that fills a room when the truth is no longer avoidable. My mother was the first to move, just a small shift forward, careful, controlled, like she was approaching something fragile or dangerous. "This is not what you think," she said. Her voice had changed again, softer now, almost gentle. And that was new. That was something I had never heard directed at me before. Not like this. Not when it mattered. I did not respond. I just watched her, because for the first time, I was not listening to what she said. I was listening to how she said it, the pauses, the tone, the hesitation she could not fully hide. "Then tell me what it is," I said.
Calm.
Even. No edge.
No accusation.
And that seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. Because she was used to control, used to reactions she could predict, emotions she could manage. But this was different. My father stepped forward slightly. Not enough to take over the conversation, but enough to position himself closer to the center of it. "We were going to tell you," he said. A sentence that always comes too late. I let that sit for a moment. Not interrupting. Not helping him finish it. Just letting the weight of those words exist in the space between us. Because timing matters. And "we were going to tell you" does not mean anything when the truth had to arrive in an envelope instead. "When?" I asked. One word. That was all it took. My father did not answer immediately. His eyes shifted just slightly. Not to my mother. Not to the paper. Just away. And in that small movement, I got my answer. There had never been a plan to tell me. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. My mother stepped in again. Faster this time. "It is complicated," she said. "There were circumstances, things you do not understand." I almost smiled again. Not because it was amusing, but because it was familiar. That phrase. "You do not understand." It had been used my entire life to end conversations before they started. To keep me in my place. To remind me that whatever I was questioning was not mine to question. But that only works when the person believes they are still inside the same system. And I was not anymore. "Then explain it," I said. Still calm. Still steady. But now there was something else under it. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. My father exhaled slowly, like he was deciding how much to say and how much to keep. "You were not originally part of this family," he said. The words came out measured, controlled, as if saying them carefully would soften what they meant. I nodded once. No. He paused, just for a second, not expecting that. My mother's eyes flickered to me, searching, trying to find something, anything she could still control. "Your biological situation, it was complicated," she continued. "There were legal issues, timing issues. We took you in when you needed stability." Stability. That word landed differently, because now I could see it for what it was. Not kindness, not generosity, a justification, a way to reframe something that no longer held up under scrutiny. And in return, I said quietly, "I was what?" Neither of them answered, because there is no version of that sentence that sounds acceptable when spoken out loud. I let the silence stretch, because silence forces truth to surface. "A daughter?" I asked. My mother's lips pressed together. "Family?" My father looked down. "Or just useful?" That was the word that stayed, hung in the air between us, because it was the only one that fit. My mother shook her head quickly. "That is not fair," she said. And there it was. Not denial. Not correction. Not "that is not true." Just "that is not fair." As if fairness was the issue. As if perspective could change what had already been done. I took a small breath. Slow. Controlled. the same way I had learned to do when everything felt too big. You said something to me, I continued. My whole life. I watched their faces carefully now. Every shift, every reaction. Some children are born to serve. My mother closed her eyes for just a fraction of a second. My father did not move at all, but his shoulders tightened. You taught me that, I said. You repeated it, over and over, until I believed it. My voice did not rise. It did not break, but it changed, just slightly, enough to carry the weight of what I was saying. Was that part of the plan too? No answer, because there is no version of that answer that does not reveal everything. I looked at them both, really looked this time, not as the people who raised me, not as authority, just as individuals. And for the first time, I saw something I had never seen before. Not power,
Not certainty.
uncertainty, and underneath that something else.
Fear.
Not fear of me, not exactly. Fear of what I now knew, because knowledge changes everything. It shifts the balance. It removes control. And once control is gone, everything else starts to fall apart. I glanced down at the report on the counter, then back at them. Who is he? I asked. My voice was quieter now, but sharper, more precise, because this question mattered. My mother hesitated. My father inhaled slowly, and then he said the name, Daniel Carter. The room went still again, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating.
Clear.
Because now the pieces were no longer scattered. They were starting to form a pattern. And for the first time, I was not just reacting to what was happening. I was understanding it. And that was the moment everything truly began to change. The name did not feel unfamiliar. That was the first thing I noticed. It did not land like a stranger's name. It landed like something I had already been circling, without realizing it. Daniel Carter. I repeated it once in my head, slowly, letting it settle into place, because now it connected everything. The way he looked at me, the way he studied the photo album, the way he asked my age, not casually but precisely. That lines up. It was never a question for him. It was confirmation. And that meant something else. He had not discovered this at the wedding. He had been looking for something before he ever walked into that room. I looked back at my parents. How long? I asked. My voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation in it anymore.
No uncertainty.
Just direction. My father exhaled slowly. The kind of breath someone takes when they know there is no version of the truth that makes them look better. Since you were a baby, he said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Since I was a baby. Not a recent discovery. Not something complicated that unfolded over time. This had been known. From the beginning. My mother stepped in quickly, like she needed to control the narrative before it slipped too far. It was not what you think, she said again. We took you in when there were legal complications. Your biological situation was unstable. Unstable. Another carefully chosen word. Neutral.
Clean. Distant.
I tilted my head slightly. Not in confusion. In focus. And him? I asked. He just disappeared. That was when my father finally looked directly at me. Not through
Me.
not past me. At me.
He did not know, he said.
That landed differently. Because it did not excuse anything but it shifted something. Did not know what? I pressed. My mother hesitated. My father did not. That you existed. Silence. Not heavy this time. Not suffocating.
Clear. Precise.
Because that sentence, it did not just answer a question. It opened a door. A door I had never even known was there. For 23 years, I had lived inside one version of the truth. A version where I was less. Where I was secondary. Where I was assigned a role that made sense only if I belonged to them. But if I never belonged to them, then everything changes. Everything. Because then the question is not, why was I treated this way? The question becomes, why was I kept at all? I looked down at the paper again. At his name. At the numbers that no one in this room could argue with. And then back at them. So you knew, I said. You knew who he was. You knew I was not yours. And you still, I did not finish the sentence. I did not need to. because the ending was already there, hanging between us. My mother's voice came softer this time, almost pleading. "We gave you a home," she said. And there it was again. The justification, the reframing, the attempt to turn control into generosity. I nodded once, slowly. "You gave me a role," I said. That was the difference. And she felt it. I could see it in the way her expression tightened, just slightly. Because she knew I was right, even if she would never say it. My father stepped forward now, just enough to shift the energy again. "Daniel Carter is a powerful man," he said. The words were deliberate, strategic. "His world is very different from this one. At the time, it was decided that it was better for you to stay where things were stable." Better for who? That question did not need to be asked, because the answer was already clear. Better for them. Better for the system they had built. Better for the version of reality where nothing had to be explained. I took a breath. Slow. Controlled. The way I always did when something inside me wanted to react faster than I allowed it to. "And he knows now," I said. Again, not a question. A statement. My father nodded once. "He knows now." That changed everything again, because this was no longer just about the past. This was about what was happening right now. The envelope. The test. The timing. None of it was random. It was a response. A deliberate move. Which meant he had made a decision. And that decision was already in motion. "Why now?" I asked. My mother did not answer. My father did not answer. But they both looked at the paper again. And that was enough. Because the answer was written there. The wedding. The moment. The recognition. He saw me, and something did not align with the story he had been given. Or maybe the story he had never been given at all. And instead of ignoring it, instead of letting it pass, he acted. That was the difference between him and everyone else in this house. He did not look away. I felt something shift inside me again. Not doubt. Not confusion. Something clearer. Sharper. Direction. Because for the first time, I was not just reacting to information. I was starting to understand my position in it. I was not the one being exposed. They were. I was not the one losing control. They were. And that realization, it changed the way the room felt. The way I stood. The way I looked at them. Because for 23 years, I had been the one adjusting. The one adapting. The one staying quiet to keep everything balanced. But now, the balance was gone. And, without it, everything else was about to shift. I picked up the paper again. Not to read it. Not to study it. Just to hold it. To feel the weight of what it represented. And then I looked at them one more time. Not as parents. Not as authority. Just as people who had built a story that no longer held. And for the first time in my life, I was not trying to find my place in that story. I was deciding what I was going to do next. The decision did not come all at once. It did not arrive like a sudden burst of clarity or some dramatic realization that changed everything in a single moment. It came quietly, the same way everything important in my life had always come. In silence. In observation. In the space between what was said and what was actually true. I stood there in the kitchen, holding the report, feeling the weight of it settle into something steady. Not overwhelming. Not chaotic. Just real. For 23 years, every decision I made was shaped by them. By what they expected. By what they allowed. By what they believed I deserved. But now that framework was gone. And without it, I had to decide something I had never been allowed to decide before. What do I want? Not what is expected. Not what is required. What do I want? I looked at the name again. Daniel Carter. The man who saw something in a room full of people who had spent decades pretending not to. The man who did not ignore it. The man who made a call and set all of this in motion. And for the first time, I asked myself a question that felt both simple and impossible. Do I meet him? My mother moved slightly, like she was about to speak again, but stopped. Watching me now. Carefully. My father did the same. Neither of them were in control anymore. And they knew it. That was the shift. Not loud. Not dramatic. But undeniable. The power in the room had changed. I set the report down on the counter again. Not because I was done with it, but because I no longer needed to hold it to understand what it meant. Did he leave a number? I asked. My voice was calm, even, directed. That question landed harder than anything else I had said so far, because it meant something. It meant I was not asking them for permission. I was moving forward. My father hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded once. There was a contact included, he said. My mother stepped in immediately. Lila, you do not need to rush into this, she said. Her tone was careful, measured, trying to sound reasonable, concerned. But underneath it, there was something else. Urgency. Not for me. For them. I turned to her slowly. Not defensive. Not emotional. Just clear. You had 23 years, I said. That was all.
No accusation.
No raised voice. Just a fact. And facts do not need volume to land. She did not respond, because there was nothing she could say that would change that timeline. I looked back at my father. Where is it? Another simple question. He gestured toward the envelope. I reached for it, opened it again. This time I noticed something I had not focused on before. A small card, tucked behind the report.
Clean.
Minimal.
A name.
A number. Nothing else. No message.
No explanation.
Just access. I held it between my fingers for a second,
Studying it.
not because I did not know what it was, but because I understood what it represented. This was not just a phone call. This was a door. And once I stepped through it, there was no going back to the version of my life that existed before. I slipped the card into my pocket. My mother's voice came again. Softer now. Almost careful. You should think about this, she said. I nodded once. I replied. And that was the truth. Because thinking about it did not mean delaying it. It meant understanding it. And I did. I understood exactly what this moment was. Not an accident. Not a coincidence. A turning point. The kind that does not announce itself, but changes everything once you move through it. I walked out of the kitchen without asking permission. Without waiting for another word. Without looking back. And that was new. Every step felt different. Not heavier. Not uncertain.
Just mine.
I went upstairs to the room that had never really been a room. The one next to the laundry machines. The one without a window. The one that had always been temporary, even though I had lived in it my entire life. I closed the door behind me, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it. Not the anger. Not yet. Something else.
Space.
Space where there used to be rules. Space where there used to be limits. Space where there used to be a version of myself that no longer existed. I took the card out of my pocket again. Turned it over. The number stared back at me. Simple.
Direct.
Waiting. I picked up my phone. Not quickly. Not impulsively. Deliberately. Because this was not a reaction. This was a choice. My finger hovered over the screen for just a second. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what I was about
To do.
And then, I pressed call. The line rang once.
Twice.
3 times. Each ring stretching the moment just a little further. And then it connected. A voice answered on the other end.
Calm. Familiar.
Hello. I did not speak immediately. Not because I did not know what to say, but because for the first time in my life, I was about to speak as someone who was not defined by the role I had been given. My name is Lila, I said.
Simple. Clear.
And then after a brief pause, I added the one thing that changed everything. I think you have been looking for me. Silence. Just for a second. And then his voice again.
Different now.
Not surprised. Not confused.
Certain.
Yes, he said. I have. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about where I came from and where I was going began to rewrite itself. He did not ask me who I was again. He did not ask me to prove anything. He did not question the call. And that told me more than anything else could have. Because people who doubt ask questions. People who already know listen. Where are you? He asked. His tone was steady. Not rushed. Not emotional. But there was something under it. Something controlled, like he was holding back more than he was saying. I glanced around my room. The same walls. The same narrow space. The same place that had never truly felt like mine. At home, I said. A pause. Not long. Just enough. I would like to see you, he said. Not we should talk. Not when you are ready.
Direct.
Intentional. A statement, not a suggestion. And, for a second, I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I understood what that meant. This was no longer abstract. No longer just information on paper. This was real. Immediate. Present. When? I asked.
Today, he said. No hesitación. No negociación.
That should have felt fast. Too fast. But it did not. Because everything leading up to this moment had taken 23 years. I can send a car, he added. Of course he could. Of course his world worked that way. Efficient.
Structured.
Solutions already in place before problems fully formed. I almost said yes automatically. That was what I had been trained to do. Accept.
Adapt.
Fit into whatever. System was already built. But this was different. This was the first decision that was entirely mine. No, I said.
Calm. Clear.
I will come on my own. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Not resistance. Not disagreement. Consideration. And then, all right, he said. I will text you the address. The call ended shortly after that. No drawn-out conversation. No attempt to explain everything all at once. Just a next step. And somehow that felt right. Because explanations can wait. But movement, that matters now. I sat there for a moment after the call ended. Phone still in my hand. The room felt different. Not smaller. Not larger. Just temporary. Like I had already stepped out of it, even though I was still physically there. I stood up slowly. Walked to the small closet. Opened it. And for the first time, I did not reach for something practical. Something assigned. Something chosen for me. I paused. Looked at what was there. Simple clothes. Neutral colors. Nothing that stood out. Nothing that claimed space. That had always been the point. Blend in. Stay unnoticed. Stay useful. But today, I did not need to disappear. I chose something different. Not dramatic. Not bold. Just intentional. Something that fit me. Not the role I had been given, but the person I was starting to understand. I changed. Moved slowly. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel every part of this shift. Every step. Every decision. Every moment where I chose something for myself instead of reacting to someone else. When I walked downstairs, my parents were still in the kitchen. Exactly where I had left them. Like time had paused for them, while it kept moving for me. My mother looked up first. Her eyes immediately scanning me. Not with approval. Not with disapproval. With uncertainty. Where are you going? She asked. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Not defensive. Not hesitant. Just steady. Out, I said. My father's voice came next. To see him. Not a question. A statement. I nodded once. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual. And then he said something I did not expect. Be careful. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of what it revealed. For 23 years, careful meant staying. Careful meant following rules. Careful meant not asking questions. But now, careful meant something else entirely. I will be, I said. And for the first time, that did not mean what they thought it meant. I walked out the front door without waiting for anything else.
No permission.
No approval.
No final instructions.
Just movement. The air outside felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I got into my car. A car I paid for myself. Not new. Not impressive. But mine. I started the engine.
Pulled out of the driveway.
And did not look back. The address came through a few minutes later. A location across town. Not in the area I was used to. Not in the version of the world I had been living in. As I drove, I noticed something else. I was not nervous. Not in the way I expected. No shaking hands. No racing thoughts. Just focus. Because this was not about meeting someone new. This was about stepping into something that had always been there, just out of reach. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to the address. It was not just a house. It was a property. Large, structured, quiet in a way that suggested control rather than emptiness. I parked, sat there for a second, hands resting on the steering wheel, and I realized something. This was the moment, not the phone call, not the envelope. The moment where I step out of one version of my life and into another. I opened the car door, stepped out, walked toward the entrance. Each step steady, measured, not rushed, because I was not being pulled into this. I was choosing it. The door opened before I could knock. And there he was, Daniel Carter, standing in front of me, not across a room, not observing from a distance, right there, close enough to see every detail, every line, every feature, and, for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not just the resemblance, the connection. The kind you do not need to explain because it exists before words ever do. He looked at me the same way he had that night. Focused. Certain. But this time, there was something else in his expression. Something I had never seen directed at me before. Not curiosity. Not analysis. Recognition. And then he spoke. You came. Simple. Direct. Like everything else about him. I nodded once. I did. And, in that moment standing there between two lives, I realized something I had never understood before. I was not stepping into something new. I was stepping into something that had always been mine. He did not step aside immediately. He did not rush the moment or fill it with words that tried to explain too much too quickly. He just stood there, looking at me. And for a second, I did the same. Because something about this moment felt different from everything that came before. Not heavier. Not overwhelming. Just honest. There was no performance here. No roles. No expectations I had to meet before I could exist in the space. Just presence. Come in, he said finally, stepping slightly to the side. I walked past him into the house. The interior was exactly what I expected, and nothing like what I was used to. Clean. Structured. Not in the way my mother demanded perfection, but in a way that felt intentional. Nothing out of place, but nothing sterile either. It felt lived in. Chosen. Not maintained out of obligation, but designed with purpose. That was the difference. He closed the door behind me quietly. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just contained. Would you like something to drink? He asked. The question was simple, but it caught me off guard for a second. Not because it was unusual, but because it was offered. Not assigned. Not expected. Offered. Water is fine, I said. He nodded once and moved toward the kitchen. I stayed where I was for a moment, taking everything in. The space. The silence. The feeling of being somewhere that did not require me to immediately make myself useful. When he returned, he handed me a glass. Not placing it in front of me like a task, but giving it to me directly. I took it. Thank you. He nodded again, then gestured toward a seating area. We sat across from each other. Not too far. Not too close. And for a moment neither of us spoke. Not because we did not have anything to say, but because both of us understood that this conversation mattered. And rushing it would only take something away from it. I should have found you sooner, he said finally. His voice was calm. But there was something under it. Not regret exactly, but awareness. Responsibility. I studied his face as he spoke. The structure. The details. The subtle similarities I had noticed before, now impossible to ignore. You did not know, I said. Not to excuse anything. Just to state what had already been said. He held my gaze. No, he said. I did not. A pause. Then, but I should have. That landed differently. Because it was not about information anymore. It was about accountability. And that, I recognized. Because it was something I had never received before. Not from the people who raised me. He leaned back slightly. Not distancing himself. Just giving the moment space. I started asking questions after the dinner, he continued. Something did not align. I nodded. Of course it did not. It had never aligned. It just took someone outside the system to see it clearly. The timelines did not match. The records did not match. And when I looked deeper, he paused. Not searching for words.
Choosing them.
I realized there was a missing piece. I glanced down at the glass in my hands for a second. Then back at him. Me, I said. He nodded once.
No hesitación.
You. Silence settled again. But this time it was different. Not heavy. Not uncertain. Just real. Because now, everything was on the table.
No hidden lies.
No controlled narratives. Just facts. And what we chose to do with them. Why did they keep me? I asked. The question came out quieter than the others. Not weaker. Just deeper. Because this was the part that still did not fully make sense. He did not answer immediately. Not because he did not know, but because he understood the weight of the question. Control, he said finally. Simple.
Direct.
And convenience. That matched everything. The roles. The expectations. The structure they had built around me.
It was never about family.
It was about function. I nodded slowly.
Not surprised.
Just confirmed. And now? I asked. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively. Not pushing. Just engaged. Now you decide, he said. That was it. No pressure.
No expectación.
No attempt to shape my answer. Just a statement of fact. And for a second, I let that sit. Because those 3 words carried more freedom than anything I had ever been given before. You decide. Not we decide. Not I decide for you. You. I took a slow breath. Let it out. And realized something. This was not about choosing between 2 families. It was about choosing myself.
For the first time.
What does that look like? I asked. Not because I needed permission, but because I wanted to understand the options in front of me. He considered that for a moment. It looks like time, he said.
Space.
Information. And no expectations from me. That last part mattered. Because expectations had defined my entire life up until now. And removing them, that changed everything. I would like to get to know you, he added. But only if you want that too. There was no pressure in it.
No hidden agenda.
Just openness. And that was new. I looked at him. Really looked. Not searching for flaws. Not trying to find something that would make this easier to reject. Just seeing him for who he was. And, for the first time, I saw something that felt familiar. Not because I had known him, but because I recognized something in him that I had always felt in myself, but never understood. The way he observed. The way he paused before speaking. The way he chose his words carefully, not to control the conversation but to respect it. And suddenly everything made sense in a way it never had before. I think I do, I said.
Quiet. Certain.
And that was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But real. The moment where I stopped being the person they told me I was and started becoming the person I actually am. We did not try to resolve everything that day. That was the first difference. There was no rush to define what this was supposed to become. No expectation that one conversation could repair or replace 23 years of something that had never been fully mine to begin with. We talked. Slowly. Carefully. Not about everything, but about enough. Enough for me to understand that this was not a moment. It was a beginning. When I left his house later that evening, the sun was already low. The light had shifted softer now, stretching shadows across the driveway as I walked back to my car. He did not stop me at the door. He did not ask me to stay longer than I was ready to. He just said, I will be here. And that meant more than anything else he could have said. Not a promise of outcomes. Not a demand. For connection. Just presence. I drove home in silence. Not because there was nothing to think about, but because there was too much. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to organize it immediately. To make it neat. To make it make sense right away. Some things deserve space before they are understood. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. Same structure. Same windows. Same quiet exterior that hid everything happening inside. But it did not feel the same. Not anymore. Because now, I could see it clearly. Not as home. Not as family. Just as a place I had stayed. I walked inside. My parents were in the living room, sitting exactly where I expected them to be, waiting. Of course they were. This was the part where they used to regain control, where they would shape the narrative again, redirect, reframe. But that only works when the other person is still playing the same role. And I was not anymore. My mother stood up as soon as I entered. "How is it?" she asked, her voice careful, measured, trying to find the right tone. I set my keys down slowly, not avoiding the question, not rushing to answer it, just choosing my words. "It was clear," I said. That was the best way to describe it. Not emotional, not overwhelming.
Clear.
My father leaned forward slightly, and he pressed. I looked at both of them, not with anger, not with resentment, just with understanding, because for the first time, I understood exactly what they had done, not in a way that excused it, but in a way that removed the confusion. And when confusion is gone, so is the need to fight for answers. "I am leaving," I said. Simple.
Direct. No build-up. No hesitation.
My mother blinked.
Once. Twice.
"Leaving where?" she asked. And that question, it revealed everything, because it assumed I still needed to explain myself within their framework. I shook my head slightly. "I am not leaving to go somewhere," I said. "I am leaving here." That landed. Fully. Completely. My father stood up now, not aggressively, but with purpose. "Lila, you do not need to make a decision like this right now," he said. I almost smiled again, not because it was amusing, but because it was predictable.
Delay.
Reframe. Regain control. The same pattern. The same strategy. But it did not work anymore. "I already did," I said.
Calm.
Final. No edge. Just truth. My mother's voice softened again, almost pleading now. "We raised you," she said. And there it was. The last argument. The one that is supposed to outweigh everything else. Obligation. History. Time invested. I nodded once. "You assigned me," I replied. Not harsh. Not loud. But precise. Because that was the difference. And she knew it. I could see it in the way her expression shifted, just slightly before she looked away. I walked past them. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just moving forward. I went upstairs to the room that had never really been mine. Opened the closet. Took what I needed. Not everything. Just what belonged to me. And, for the first time, I understood what that meant. Not what they gave me. Not what I used. What was mine. When I came back downstairs, they were still there. Watching. Silent now. Because there was nothing left to say that could change what was already in motion. I paused at the door, for just a second. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be clear. Not for them. For myself. I turned back slightly, looked at them one last time, and said the one thing that had been building quietly inside me for years. "I was never your servant," I said. A small pause. Just enough. I was just never yours. And then, I walked out.
No slam. No dramatic exit.
Just a door closing behind me. The air outside felt the same as it had earlier. But I did not. Because for the first time in my life, I was not stepping into something I had been assigned. I was stepping into something I had chosen. And that is where everything truly begins.